The goal of this presentation is to introduce you to the concept of ethnographic interviews and provide some basic guidelines for how you should carry out the interview for this course. And so if you look at the project that we're engaged in right now, the overall purpose really is to listen deeply and reflectively to the person you're interviewing. The purpose is to become more aware of the ways in which culture influences the way we listen and the way others interact with us. It's to hear the many ways in which language, culture, and worldview are mixed. So really, this is a practice in listening. And some of the themes that we're going to explore here, first of all, are the social, cultural, and spiritual dynamics related to your specific problem statement and research question. And the primary method that we're going to present here is a conversational interview or an ethnographic interview. I'm actually pushing you more towards what's called an unstructured interview rather than a structured or semi-structured interview. It's somewhere between unstructured and semi-structured, I would say. So through this interview, you're going to be investigating a social network or investigating a person's perspective on a social problem through actively listening to them. And I would note here that the overall approach is really based on a process model of culture. So we're not trying to overly generalize about cultures. We're just trying to listen and understand that culture is messy and it's expressed differently through different people and different people who live within a social and cultural context. And so you're just listening to one person, trying to get their perspective to try to understand that perspective on the problem you're trying to investigate. So for this project, your goal is to hold a 30 to 45-minute conversational interview with an informant from the local context that you're investigating. For the format, you will individually carry out an interview with your informant. You will record the interview and reflect on your experience. I would note that in more advanced studies, you would actually interview, fully transcribe it, and then there's a process for analyzing the transcription to come up with codes and identifying themes that emerge through that interview. And typically, when you do this kind of interview, you're going to want to carry out 20 to 30 interviews in a location before you can really start coming up with some kind of firm conclusions or answers to your research question. You're just interviewing one person, trying to get a perspective here. And so, we're going to hold the findings kind of loosely, but the idea is to give you some practice in investigation and research. And the purpose here then is simply to record and reflect and to listen well. Also, I would note that after walking through the following steps of the interview and preparing for the interview, I will be giving you an example interview in the course, and so you can look at that, and then there's a separate presentation in which that interview will be analyzed, and that will help you think through the process of analyzing your own interview. So first of all, the first step in preparing for this ethnographic interview is to isolate the research questions, right? You've already done this. What are the previously identified variables and research questions that you're planning to investigate through your interview? And then what you need to do is move towards preparing the question. And I would say that your goal here is to get your informant to tell a story that could last 10 to 15 minutes, because your goal is to listen. So you want to design questions that will actually get them talking, telling a story, telling their perspective on the issue at hand. So what you want to do is make sure that you're asking open-ended questions. You're not asking simple yes-no type of questions. You want to ask for stories about their personal experience so you can get their insight into the topic. That's really all you're going to find out here anyway, is their perspective on the topic. And then I want you to know that we can learn a lot about culture, social networks, about worldview by listening not only to what people say, but to how people tell their stories, and then what the storyteller chooses to talk about, as well as what they choose not to talk about. And so that's what part of this whole reflective listening piece is all about. So you want to choose the theme that you're interested in that's related to your research topic. But generally when you do research, you don't want to focus in on something that you're an expert on because you bring too much baggage into that question. You want to actually be able to listen to and accept what your informant is telling you. So then you're being asked to write a series of 4 to 6, maybe up to 8 research, interview questions that you can use during this extended interview. What I was hoping to point out to you is that in a separate file in the Blackboard course, there's actually a model interview that you might want to go and look at. And what I'm providing this here for is to help you see how asking a fairly open-ended question, such as this one here, in Burundi, how did your family celebrate Christmas? Tell me about a Christmas that you remember spending with your family. Very open-ended, gets them talking. And he just talks. This is an informant from Burundi. He currently lives in Nebraska. And I recorded about 3 minutes of his response there. But you can tell that there were so many very informative things that he mentions just in that 3-minute clip. And so please see that file in Blackboard so that you can understand the importance of asking these types of questions that get your informant talking. Then what I'm providing elsewhere there is a model for debriefing what you've listened to. So if you ask for a story, right, in your interview, then a number of really interesting cultural elements could emerge. Your job is just to listen. So after choosing your theme and questions, I want you to think about the specific ways in which you will listen to your interview. So you're anticipating this interview. How are you going to listen to them, and how are you going to monitor? Michelle does a great job of challenging us to monitor our own interactions here. But you should monitor your reaction to your informant's story. Take note of that if you have some kind of reaction. You don't have to tell your informant about the reaction or talk about it, but you should note it personally. Note, how does he or she tell the story? What is the content of the report? What did they choose to talk about? What did they choose not to talk about? How does he or she respond to your questions and nonverbal feedback? Pay attention to your nonverbal feedback. How are they responding to that? Think about those other elements of the conversation and take note of those things. Again, you're not discussing it with them, but you're noting it as an element of the research scenario. As you prepare for the interview, also, you should ask your interviewee for permission and make an appointment with them. You're actually being required to do this in the class, but you need to get this all set up. This shouldn't be just an on-the-fly type of thing. You need to think carefully about the place where you're going to hold the interview. Is it a place that's even conducive to a conversational interview? You don't want to be having a lot of distractions going on. You want to be able to focus in on a good, deep conversation. And then you need to plan ahead to record the interview, and you actually need to ask permission to do it, to record it before you start the recording. So plan ahead on that. Make sure you've got a recorder on your phone or a digital recorder, whatever you're going to use. And then at the start of your interview, you're actually going to get verbal consent from them to do this interview for research in this class and to record that. As you do the interview, a few things just to know. First of all, you want to begin by thanking them for meeting you. You want to tell them just briefly the reasons for doing the interview and for recording it. Then you want to ask your questions, and you're going to record it. You're going to listen. And as you listen, make note of any of your nonverbal responses, but don't take too many notes while you're there. It's okay to take some notes and have a pen and paper there, but don't let that become a distraction. Your job is mostly here just to listen. Remember, you're recording this, so you don't have to write too much. At the end, of course, thank your interviewee for spending that time with you. After the interview, then, what you want to do, you don't want to wait days. You want to do this as soon as possible. You want to take some extra notes about your interview location, the interviewee, the responses, and any kind of reactions that you might have had or anything that's important to note about that whole interview context. You also want to listen to your recording then sometime later and take notes on interesting comments, ways of approaching the subject, and your reaction to those comments. Actually, in this course, you're going to end up writing up a summary transcript and submitting that as well. It's not a full-blown transcript, but it's a summary version. But in addition to that, you want to take some notes on the other dynamics that don't come out in a transcript that regarding the interaction. And then what I'd like you to do is watch this separate presentation in the course, which helps you know how to analyze your interview, to look deeply into it, to see what's going on, what kind of cultural expressions, what kind of responses are there. And I hope that will be helpful to you.